Right, so there's no time to waste. I'm going to show you how to be speedy in Mardini. Let's get straight into it. First tip that I'm going to give you is give yourself a goal. It's really important to have a reason to do this. So whether that be to improve over the 30 days and learn something new, or to win a single day, or to win the whole thing overall, to prove something to yourself, or to prove something to your boss, or to prove something to your mom. Have a reason that means something to you and then stick with it. That's going to help you stay motivated. And by the end of the month, looking back on your goal, you're going to feel a much bigger sense of accomplishment, knowing that you took actionable steps towards it. Second tip. My second tip is to stay consistent. Instead of going for big, flashy things and then burning yourself out, rather go for things that are right at the edge of your ability. Create an entry every day that's just at the edge of what you're capable of managing. You'll find that as you go, that boundary slowly starts to increase and you can do more and more, and you'll find that you're a much better Houdini artist at the end of Mardini. Tip number 3 is to not take it too seriously. Don't get too competitive. And that's rich coming from me, because towards the last few days I wasn't sleeping because I needed to beat the person in second place. But I also stressed myself out. Sometimes it's not worth the stress. So just remember that this is a fun learning experience and try to keep it light. Try not to get too serious about it. Next, the first Houdini specific thing is focus on your lighting and your presentation. Oftentimes people will come up with a really great scene and they spent all this time creating this awesome setup and then they go ahead and use the default headlight. So don't do that. One of the easiest lighting setups that you can do is a calmer physical sky. Work with turbidity to make it softer and more diffuse. Work with the disk size for softer shadows. Work with the altitude to go from anywhere from noon to sunrise or sunset and get golden hour with a range of about 12 to 20. Otherwise, use a dome light and HDRIs and throw in a light to accentuate one of the particular light sources or directions coming in from that HDRI. Alternatively, if you want something a bit richer and more tailor-made, then go ahead and do these few steps to separate your background from your foreground. Focus on contrast. That's the most important thing. The first thing you might do is throw in a light in the background to separate your focal point from the background. Then you might add an edge light so that you can focus on those contours. Then you're going to throw in a main light, and it brings attention to your subject matter and allows your viewer to see it. Then you might have all of these harsh shadows up front. So then throw in a light from the front, make that your full light. With that full light, go ahead and drop a light linker and only apply that full light to the ground so that it doesn't flatten your focal point. Again, if you want to see all of that in depth, there's another video that goes much longer, but it goes in depth on all of those things. Next, when it comes to your camera setup, try to focus on fitting things into thirds of your camera space, whether that be vertically or horizontally or both. So at the crossing points where horizontal lines meet vertical lines, that's a good place to put a focal point and it adds a lot of interest to your shots. Alternatively, dirty up the foreground and dirty up the background. Adding things in the foreground that are just sort of nondescript is a great way to add depth to your shot. Then go ahead and work with depth of field to throw those things out of focus and to end up with that good looking depth of field. If your foreground is taking away from your focal point, then crank up your focal length. That's going to squash your foreground and background together. If you want to see more of your foreground, then decrease your focal length and you'll have more of a range in your shot's depth. Then once you have all of that, go ahead and drop a COP network in your Solaris network. And inside of there, use a slap comp block node. That will allow you to bring in whatever's in your viewport and then you can apply some cool post-processing to it. Add a background by throwing in a ramp and using an over operation, and putting the color ramp as the background and putting your rendered image as the foreground. That's going to be a quick and dirty way of adding a background to any of your images. Do a little bit of glow, do a little bit of chromatic aberration, and I do mean a little bit. Maybe a denoise if you're running out of time for your render. Then go back into your viewport, activate that little purple button on the right hand side for your slap comp. Then in the bottom left, you can actually output this directly to disk, or on your render node, you can go down and find the husk, go over to slap comp, select your slap comp, enable it, get the block end, and then you can output that directly to disk applied to your renders. Make sure to remove any of the AOVs that you haven't actually specified, like the depth. It won't apply a slap comp if it runs into errors with your AOVs. Then for things where you have motion that you want to show off, sometimes you don't have to actually do an animated sequence to show off motion. Make use of things like motion blur and camera blur. So use the velocity attribute, and then in your camera render settings, make sure that you have enabled velocity blur. That allows you to get really good looking motion even in still images. My next tip is to reuse. One of the best things about Houdini is the proceduralism, so make use of it. So focus on a system that gives you a cool result rather than manually putting in everything yourself. If you can build one tree and then copy it 1,000 times, that's better than creating 1,000 trees. So rely on scatters and instancing. Do all of those things to really enhance your scene. Next, rely on recipes. Recipes are a great way to reuse things. In the same way that you might copy things multiple times in your same scene, a recipe is going to be useful between day-to-day operations. For example, you can set up your entire network in Solaris and then save that as a recipe. Then tomorrow, when you work on your next Mardini entry, all you have to do is tab and type in the name of the recipe, and all of your nodes are going to be there with all of their settings. It's a super easy way to create things that aren't exactly an HDA, but that you might need every single day. The same thing goes for creating little systems or tool sets. If you need some debris in crevices on any geometry, make a recipe that does that for you, and then every single time, all you have to do is press tab and type in debris, and there you have your custom tool. My next tip is keep it simple. There's no time to be doing huge simulations, even though Houdini is a simulation software. If you're going to be doing a simulation, keep it tiny, keep it little. Think small puddles and smoke puffs. And that's going to save you from biting off more than you can chew. And then finally, just about being creative. If there's a particular topic that you're not sure what to do with, consider different meanings of the word, or consider things that are related. Think of opposites and how you can actually mix them together. If the topic is sky, how can we maybe make the ground look like the sky? That's a really quick and easy way of doing something that's a little bit more interesting than taking it at face value. Or think about related words. So just sit there and say a bunch of words that happen to be related to the topic. For example, stone. You can think rock, mineral, gem, jewelry, museum, crystal, artifact, and then all of a sudden you've now moved the entire concept all the way over to artifact, and now you can make something that's maybe sitting in a museum that's lit from above, and maybe it's a precious stone that's been cracked open and is in a museum, right? So all of a sudden you're starting to give things context just by expanding on the word, by thinking of related words. So that's a really fun little exercise that you can do if you're not entirely sure what to do. So I hope that these tips help you. If you need something a bit more in-depth, then check out the expanded version of this video, in which I go through some of these concepts in a bit more detail. I also included some files for things like your lighting setup, and you can check how to play around with light linkers and light mixers and all of those things. So that's all. I do hope to see you all during Mardini. I'll be doing some weekly review videos and looking at all of your awesome entries. So I hope that you all have loads of fun with this. It is honestly one of the best ways to learn how to use Houdini. So get out there and go be speedy in Mardini.